We got up to Daf Tes, and we're about, I would say, a third of the way down from the top. You'll see on the left side of Tosas Dibur Haskell Ma, which is not the first Ma, but the second Ma. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. The fifth Tosas down from the top. And a little bit below that, where the line starts with the word Tachton, you'll see Virabon, which is the fourth word in that line. Now, let's just mention, just to review some of the background here, that Rebbe had a Gzeira Shava of Oleha that taught us that just like Eishes Ach is a Chiyuv Kares, so too a Karban Chatos is brought if you violate a Chiyuv Kares. Obviously, you're not Chayiv Kares because you did it b'shogeg. Now, the Rabbanan did not accept that Gzeira Shava. They can't accept the Gzeira Shava because the Rabbanan used the word Aleha for Tsaras Ereva. Once you use the word Aleha for Tsaras Ereva as a local halacha in Yibum, that in the case of Achos Ishtal, there's no Yibum, you don't have Aleha free for Gzeira Shava to teach you that a Karban Chatas only applies when there's a Chiyuv Kares. And the rule of Gzeira Shava is that you need what's called a nifnem. Nifnem means it's got to be an extra pasuk. So there's an extra word here, and the same word appears as superfluous elsewhere. You make Gzeira Shava. But according to the Rabbanan, who used the word Aleh in the Parashat Achos Ishto to exclude us from Yibum, they don't have the luxury of using Aleh as a Gzeira Shava to derive the conclusion that a Karban Chatas is only brought be Chiyuv Karetz. So Rabbanan Hai Svar Minolav. How then do the Rabbanan derive the conclusion that in a case, for example, of any Chatas, let's give one example as a Parahelim Dover Shel Tzibur, where the Tzibur violated a Chiyuv Kares based on a Horas Bezdin B'Tos, then it's got to be a Horas Bezdin, not on a regular lav that generates malchus, but on a high level, high intensity lav of kares. That's the precondition for a Karban Chatas. How do you derive that conclusion in the absence of a Gzeira Shava of Oleha? Once again, according to the Rabbanan who need the pasuk Oleha to derive the ptur of Tsaras Erva, they don't have Oleha for the Gzeira Shava, is Nafkalahu. The Gemara says they're going to have to derive that Chatas requires Kares, mean the Karile, like the drasha of Rabbi Yeshua Lebre. Rabbi Yeshua taught his son a drasha from the parasha of Chatas. Now, the parasha of Chatas that we're about to look at is a case of Chatas Avodah Zarah. And there are specific laws with regard to a Chatas of Avodah Zarah. And I think we mentioned last week already that one carbon is not sufficient. In the case of Avodah Zarah, you need a par li'ola and a sayer lechatas. But again, we're going to have to come back to this point later because there really are two different cases or categories of Avodah Zarah. There's Avodah Zarah of a Yachid, an individual who worshipped an idol, and then there's the Avodah Zarah of Rov Hatzibur. In any event, what happens in the Parsha of Chatas Avodah Zarah? And this is in Vayikra Tesvav. Let's just see if the Torah R sometimes helps us out here. And Vayikra. There it is. I think if you have the same Torah R that I have, It's number Vav, which is all the way in the right column of your Do you have such a thing? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the way in the right column, but towards the bottom of the page. V'haya im me'einei ha'ida nesta lishgaga v'asu kol ha'eda par ben bakara echad li'olah l'reach nichach Hashem. Okay, actually, you know what? I think we better take out a chumash because I think I'm reading the wrong pasuk, and we're going to need this pasuk later on in the sunnah, not now. Give me a minute here. We have a chumash there. If you can open up, let's see if I got this right. Perek Tezvav, pasuk Lamed. I'm sorry. It should be Chavtes, right before Lam. Does it say there, Steve? You can read it out loud.
Ezra, Ibn Israel, Yer Hagor, Torah, Achas, Yer Lachem, Mos, Bishpat.
Torah Achas Yer Lachem, Ha'ose Bishkaga.
And then the next. Nefesh Asher Taseh Biyad Ramon Minha Ezra Minha Yer Es Hashem Umagabe Nikrasa Nefesh Shahi Yikir Lama.
So the two psukim here, Chavtes and Lam, correct? Okay, good. Those are the two psukim. What I showed you here in Torah Or is going to be coming around the bend here, but that we're not ready for that yet. I jumped the gun a little. Okay, so we have the first pasuk that says Torah Achas Yelachem Lioseh B'Shkaga, and immediately afterwards it says V'Nefesh Shetase B'Yad Ramah, and we have now what we call smuchin. You remember we spoke about smuchin back in the case of Kalayim B'Tzitzis. And now we also have a case of smuchim, and the smichus is between the chatos of avodah zara b'shogeg and the kares of avodah zara b'mezid, right? Because pasuk lamed is talking about mezid. That's called yad ramah, and the end of that pasuk says v'nichrasa nefesh ahi me'kerev amah. So the previous pasuk is talking about Oseh Vishgaga. And the second pasuk is talking about the Yad Ramah, which is amazing. And the second pasuk ends with V'nichras Nefesh to tell me that if a person violates Avodah Zarah b'mezid, he's chayiv karetz. Again, if he had Edom and Asra, he'll be put to death. But if there's no Edom and Asra, he's chayiv karetz. And the previous pasuk is speaking about a shgaga, telling you that he has to bring a carbon chatos for shgaga. In what case? In case where hanefesh ahi ashatas b'yad ramah v'nichus hanefesh ahi, where he would be chayiv kares if it was amazing. So that we have basically a smichus between the chatos of avodah zarah b'shogeg and the case of avodah zarah b'mezid, where there's a chiyuv kares. In both cases, we need a chiyuv kares. Now, honestly, I'm not sure if the Gemara is coming lafuke a kind of avodah zarah which is a lav without kares. I'm not sure, although I think last week I suggested that. I don't know if that's the way you have to go over here. It could be that we're dealing not with, the case specifically in which he violated avodah zarah. We're dealing with categories. And avodah zarah, as a general category, requires a chiyuv kares. Uksha kol atarkula lavodas kol chavim. Because when it says in Pasuk Lama that you just read, Vanefesh Shetasa Biyad Rama, that's referring to Kol Kula, any violation. As far as the Chiv Karbonis is concerned, there's a hekesh between any violation and Avodas Kol Chavim. Ma Avodas Kol Chavim, Dover Shechayavin al Zdono Karis al Shigasa Chatos, Af Kol Dover Shechayavin al Zdono Karis Vel Shigasa Chatos. Okay. Now, the Gemara at this particular juncture is going to emphasize the word vehan nefesh. By the way, my goal for today, I hope we'll reach it, is to get to the bottom of the Yom because I want to get back to Masechet Yevamot. With Talmud Bavli, I don't have to tell you, but I didn't want to skip this. I thought of skipping it, but all right. Now, the word va'nefesh indicates a yachid. It says va'nefesh shetasa, and then it says v'nichrusa nefesh ahi. So the Gemara says that we still are falling shy of our goal. Our goal is to determine the requirement of kares, not just for a carbon shgaga or carbon chatos biyachid, which is called va'nefesh, but even for a tzibur. Now, keep in mind that if rov of the tzibur, based on a mistaken hora of the Bezdin, would worship an avodah zarah, then the Torah says you have to bring a parli ol of his sorah lechatos. How do we know that? Meaning, how do we know that that's only a case of a carbon? Sorry, of a chiyuv chat, of a chiyuv karetz. How do we know that? Ashkavan, you've proven to me from the smichus aparshios of chatos avodah zarah to all other averos that you require kares for the carbon chatos. That's only ashkan leyachid. For example, a yachid, a regular rank and file citizen, or a nasi, or a mashiach, which means a kohen gadol. In all these three cases, we talk about a yachid, we talk about an individual. And now you've told me that bein b'avodas kacham, bein b'shar mitzvos, in all cases of a yachid, when he brings a karban chatos, it's because he violated that which would generate kares b'mezid. But when we get to the case of par v'soyer, of tzibur b'avodas kachavim, minayin, how do we know that these karbonos are only brought if there's a violation of a davar shes dono kares? Then shigigaso cham. We don't have a smichus aparshios to v'nichrasa in the case of tzibur, because the case of v'nichrasa is v'nichrasa nefesh ahi, which means that you're talking about the shkaga of a yachid. You're not talking about the shkaga of a tzibur. In regard to shkaga of a tzibur, the Torah doesn't say nefesh. It couldn't say nefesh. We're talking about the tzibur. So chatos yachid you've derived. But what about chatos tzibur? The Gemara answers that we got up to what? We got up to Pasuk Lam, correct? Amar Kra. Again, Amar Kra, we're back to the same parsha here of Vayikra Tesvav, and we're dealing with Avodah Zarah. Amar Kra, in the parsha of Avodah Zarah, and we're talking about a yachid now, violates Avodah Zarah b'shogeg. It says v'im nefesh achas. So, Steve, if you don't mind opening up the Chumash one more time. Because we're looking for this vav here in v'im nefesh. You have that? Pasuk of Zayin, right? Want to read out loud?
Nefesh achas Baga Riva Es Bash Nasa Lachatas.
Okay. So that's the korban chatas for the avodah zarah that's violated by whom? By a yachid, not by the tzibur, because it says v'im nefesh achas hefka mishkog. But why the extra vav? What's v'im nefesh? And we have a principle called vav mosif al inyan rishon or al inyan elyon.
Before that, Nisla Kokol and Das Ben Israel Belagir Habur Sokolam Ki Lakal Ha'am.
Okay.
That was the
So again, since this pasuk is talking about what? So we're talking about a korban, a tzibur, and the pasuk says at the beginning of the parasha of Shkaga in avodah zarah of a yachid, it says in nefesh achas, meaning a yachid, and we have ve'im nefesh, the vav mosif al inyan rishon, is therefore yilmad elyon mitachton. The previous pasuk in the case of tzibur is going to be, which is called the elyon, is going to be derived from the tachton, the next pasuk of the yachid, and it's going to tell me that whatever it says in the parsha of chatas tzibur, that's called the elyon, we're going to derive from the tachton, the later parsha, which is chatas yachid, and just like in the parsha lamata of chatas yachid, you're only chayv a chatas for something that's shkoga, that's dona kares. So too, in a chatas tzibur that was elyon, that came right before it, you're only going to bring a korban if the avodah zarah was violated in a way that had it been b'mezid, it would be chayav korban. So now the Gemara is going to turn back. Oh no, we're not ready for that yet. Sorry. So the Gemara says, okay, you're talking about par helem davar shel tzibur in the case of avodah zarah. And now we've derived that the double korban, the par v'soyer, for the tzibur's violation of avodah zarah applies only with a chiv kares. But ella tzibur b'shar mitzvahs minolan. Forget about avodah zarah. Let's put that on the back burners. What happens if rov hatzibur violates based on a mistaken horah space? Then another aver, not avodah zarah. How do we know that the chi of chatas in such a case only applies if it's a davar shes dono karetz? We only have a basis for the tzibur of avodah zarah. What about the tzibur of shar mitzvahs, what we call par helim davar shel tzibur? How do we know that it's conditional on a chi of karetz? And the Gemara answers that we have a gzeira shava yolif me'ene. So we have in par helim davar shel tzibur v'nelam davar me'ene hakahol v'yasu achas mikol mitzvah shema shalot ha'asena. That's in Vayikra Daled. And in par v'sor shel tzibur shel avodas kochavim, it says v'hoya im me'ene. That's the pasuk that we looked at before. We jumped the gun in Torah or v'hoya im me'ene ha'eda nesesol l'shkog. So you see the word me'ene twice. Again, it's not written in the Gemara itself. little tricky here. You have to use the Torah or. So we're going to say that just like Eine in the parsha of Par V'Soyer Shalavodas Kochavim only applies to the Davar Shechayav and Kares, so to the May Eine in the parsha Kol Shar Mitzvahs Torah, it's only the Davar Shezdono Kares. So now the Gemara asks the question for Rebbe. Right? Rebbe was the one who darshan the din of Parhel and Davar Shel Tzibur from Gzeira Shavah Leo. So he's not darshaning Torah Achas like the Chachamim did. Is high Torah Achas my Ovidle? What Rasha do we derive from the pasuk Torah Achas? According to Rebbe, was Rebbe had the Gzeira Shavah Leo. I mean, our whole development here with Torah Achas was based on the Rabbanon who used Oleh for Tzoras Sota. I'm sorry, for Tzoras Erba in the case of Yibum. But according to Rebbe, he uses the Oleh for the Gzeira Shavah. And that itself is going to teach me that we have a requirement of a Chiv Chatos of Mezid, of Kares B'Mezid. What do we need Torah Achas for? The Gemara answers, "Mi boile." Rebbe needs the pasuk Torah Achas. Look at his sanya for the following brisa. What is the brisa? Lefi shematzinu shecholak hakosuf. So we're talking about avodah zarah. Bein yechidim limerubim. Now we're talking about a mezid. So if one individual never worships avodah zarah b'mezid, he's chayav skila. If most of the city violates avodah zarah, that's called an ir hanidachas, and the members of that city are put to death with sayif. Okay, then with sayif. Something for the 90th time. It never works for me. Again, why do we need Torah Achas? So the Brisa says that there are two categories of Avodah Zarah. There's the Yachid who worships Avodah Zarah b'meiz and he's chayv skila. And if Rov HaTzibur worships Avodah Zarah, that's called an Irani Dachas, and they are put to death by Sayif. Yechidim b'skila. Lefichach mamonam balat, which means that if an individual chas v'shalom worships avodah zarah, he's put to death by skila, but we don't take away his possessions. We don't have to burn his clothes or anything like that. But merubim, in the case of an irani dachas, where most of the city worshipped avodah zarah, and number one besayif, they're put to death by a more severe punishment. But lefichach mamonim ovan, in addition to that, all their mammon has to be burnt. So we see clearly that there's a distinction here between the yachid and the Irani Dachas, the Rov HaTzibur, in two ways. Number one, in terms of which punishment we use to put them to death, and number two, in terms of whether Avad Mamonim, whether we have to burn their mammon. In Yachol, I might think that even B'Karbanos Seyem, that if the members of one particular city worshipped Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg, we're not going to apply the din of a yachid. No one has to bring a se'ir lechatas, like in the case of a yachid. Almid Loma Torah Achas Yelachem. That whether it's a Yachid who worships Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg, or it's a complete city that worshipped Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg. Again, Parvis Soyer is brought by the Tzibur and not by the Yachid. In the case of a Yachid who worships Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg, so he brings his Se'ira Lechatos. And now the Torah says Torah Achas Yelachem, which applies even to Ir Hanidachas, where the whole city was worshiping Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg. And it's teaching me that each one as an individual is chayav to bring a se'ira lechatos. So what happens here? I'm a little bit perplexed. In an ir nidachas situation, does everybody bring their own personal soil lechatos? And in addition, the tzibur has to bring a korban tzibur of the parvis soil. He writes here, Shalom Nemar din parvis soyer el tzibur came shagu kol Yisrael aruba. Oh, I see what's going on. Oh, I'm sorry. I missed the main point. See, I was confusing tzibur with ir nidachas. No. Tzibur means kol Yisrael, the entire nation of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, below. Whereas ir nidachas is one particular city. So the parvis soyer of Avodah Zarah Shel Tzibur, that only applies in Kol Yisrael. Whereas the Se'ira, in the case of an Ir Nidachas, if it was B'Shogeg, that's each individual bringing their own Se'ira, and we treat them exactly like one individual, one Yachid, who worshipped Avodah Zarah B'Shogeg. He's no different, they're no different at all, even though it's an Ir Nidachas. So you would have had a Havamina that Rove of one particular city is equal to Rove of Kol Yisrael, but that's not so. And we derive that from Torah Achas Yelachem, that whether it's a Yachid who worshipped Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg, or whether it's an entire city that worshipped Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg, in both cases, each individual will bring a se'ira lechatos as a korban yachid, and under what conditions would there be a chiyuv of par of what's called par le'ola v'sor lechatos, and no individual's chayav in a korban? That's when it's Kol Yisrael or Rov Yisrael. Okay, let's see. We're getting close to our goal here on that. Maskif Rav Chilkia Mehagronia. So we needed a separate Yalfusa to teach us that if an entire city worships Avodah Zarah b'Shogeg, they have the same din as Yechidim. They're just simply an amalgamation of Yechidim. Correct? Which means they bring Se'ira Lechatos. Taima, the reason why we equate the entire city with the individual in terms of Shigigas Avodah Zarah is dichsiv because of the pasuk. Pasuk Rachmana Torah Achas Yelachem Olav Hachi Hav Hamina Shenachlok if not for the drasha of Torah Achas, we would have made the following distinction. We would have said that if it's rov ear and they're an ear and idachas, let him get away with par liola v'sar lachatas. Not every individual has to bring his own carbon. So now Rav Chilkia is going to say that that makes no sense. This Havamina, that if Rove of the city worships Avodah Zarah Bishgoga, they would bring a par v'soyer. That's not correct. Why not? Why is it impossible to say shenechalik? Right, that would make that distinction. Because again, the whole basis of this distinction was because a yachid gets skila and a city gets sayef. A yachid, we do not destroy his possessions, and in the city we destroy the possessions. We see already a fundamental distinction between the yachid and the tzibur meaning rove of one city. Now the Gemara is going to apply that logic to a comparison to other chatos, where we have a generic category of chatos, and we have the chatos of avodah zarah shel tzibur. Now let's leave out avodah zarah. Let's say rov hatzibur would violate another avera other than avodah zarah. My license. What carbon should they bring? Now I think he's applying what we call a mimonef. Par. If you're going to tell me that the members of the Irani Daka should bring a par, is tzibur b'shar mitzvahs udemaisi. In other words, the Gemara is pressing this agenda that we make a distinction between a case of merubim. I think the Gemara is calling it a tzibur now. And let's distinguish between tzibur of any avera and tzibur of avodah zarah. So as far as parallel is concerned, the parallel chatos, so the tzibur brings a parallel chatos. It's called Helen Par Helen Dovashal Tzibur. So in the case of Irani Dachas, they would not be bringing a carbon parallel chatos. But let's raise another possibility. Forget about par, which is for the tzibur. Let's talk about kizbo, which is for the yochid. The shar mitzvahs, uda maisi. Not in the case, I guess, of avodah zarah. The Gemara saying, what carbon will the tzibur bring in the case of an ir nidach? To say that they should bring a par, so that's unique because a par is brought by the tzibur, and now we're talking about a conglomeration of yechidim in the case of ir nidach. So par is out. The other option is kizba, but a yachid brings a kizba for other mitzvahs, but not for avodah zarah. Why would we have a havamina that the members of an ir anidachas, each one would bring a soy or a kizba? Now, soir, so we left out par, we excluded par because that's unique for a par helim dovashal tzibur. We left out kizba because that's only for a yochid. So what are we left with for a possible carbon for the ir anidachas? We're left with soir. So the Gemara says no. A soir is also singled out or restricted, dedicated to what? To a nasi b'shar mitzvahs hu demaisa. So a nasi, when he violates other mitzvahs of the Torah b'shogeg, he brings a soy. So now we have another possibility. Parli olav is soy lechat. Right? Let's bring both a par and a soy. But that's impossible because what? Because tzibur b'avodas kocham hu demaisi, that combination of par and soy is uniquely singled out and dedicated to avodah zarah of the tzibur. And the tzibur here in this context means, I think, kol klal Yisrael, not just an ir anidachas. Elamai, so what should they bring? This is the last of four possibilities. Seira. The Gemara says that's also impossible. Kol yochid nami hainu karbana. What does that mean? Yochid nami hainu. The seira is brought by a yochid. Gentlemen, can you tell me what that means? A seira is brought by a yachid. I think what it means is, just 1 second, there's a footnote here. Seira. Oh, no. I have a feeling he means seira in other mitzvahs. If it was avodah zarah, and he brings a kizba. But if it was other mitzvahs, he brings a seira. Gemara says, no, that can't be an option for ir anidachas because yochid nami hainu karbana. So basically, what the Gemara is doing by process of elimination is the Gemara is drawing the exact same conclusion that we derive from Torah Achas. And the Gemara is asking, why do we need Torah Achas? What's the Havamina? that in the case of Irani Dachas, we really need a chart here for this Gemara. I just want to finish up the sugya. Again, we're saying that a yachid who violates avodah zarah b'shogeg brings a seira lechatos. Now we have Torah achas yelacher, teaching me that if an entire city worships avodah zarah, then each individual has to bring a seira lechatos. Right, so we went from the yachid to the rabbin. The yachid brings a seira lechatos, the rabbin brings a seira lechatos. And the Gemara is saying that that's the only possibility. Elamai seira, exactly to the kol yachid nami hainu karbana. That the yachid brings a seira. We've already established, therefore, that there's an equation between chatas of the ear of the city and chatas of the yachid. Why do I need Torah achas? I need Torah achas to equate the carbon of yechidim with the carbon of the rove of a city. Salkedait kamina hovit sibu. Behora maisu par liolo chatos. We already have a precedent that in the case of a shogeg of a tzibur, where on a mistaken ruling, they violated a chiv karis, they have to bring a paraliol of isar lechatos, is let's impose that on the Irani Dachas and say that even though the Irani Dachas is not a tzibur per se, it's rove of the city, nevertheless, they should also bring a par liola nisar lechat. One second. Wait, 1 second. Something went fishy here. Salkedat kamina ovid sibu. Par liola atos. You see the word ibcha? It says inu nami naisu ibcha. In other words, in the case of Rabim, of an Irani Dachas, they also should bring a par and a sawyer, but it should be ibcha. What does that mean, ibcha? Ibcha means a par lechatos and a sawyer liola. This is really interesting. The Gemara excluded all the different possibilities and come up with the final answer. It's got to be seira, like a yachid. And therefore, why do I need Torah achas? Now the Gemara is saying, wait a minute. Since there is an element here of tzibur, in the case of Irani Dachas, right, because it's rove of that city, let them bring the same two animals and the same two categories of karbonos as a tzibur that worshipped avodah zarah, meaning Kol Yisrael. But just we're going to switch it around. There's going to be a par and a soy. But instead of a par liola and a soy lechatos, it'll be a par lechatos and a soy liola. Inami, another possibility of why I need Torah Achas is Tzarech the Ein Lo Takana. So the Bnei Ha'ir need a kapara because they violated Avodah Zarah Shogeg, but there is no takana. They shouldn't bring a carbon. We've excluded all the possibilities. We've always distinguished between this case of Ir Anidachas and all the other Chiyuvei Chatos. And therefore they shouldn't be bringing the same Chatos which other categories of individuals bring. So in the Havamina, therefore, before Torah Achas, we would have said that there's no takana, ain't no takana. There's no possible kapara. There's no possible carbon. But mashmallah, now we derive from Torah Chasiyalachem that we equate the din of shogeg of the ear, meaning the nidachas, to the shogeg of a yachid, all in the case of avodah zarah. Okay, that brings us back to Masechet Yevamot. Okay, so what? Again, if we were learning this, we'd have to go into more detail about kodshim. Okay, now, do you have page Samach Zayin? Okay. We're gonna need to come back to this. Okay, so on the left column, and we're talking about the last two paragraphs on the page. We're on Daf Ches Amud Beis, so we're going to turn back one Daf here. Give me a minute just to. So we're looking for the Kal Vachomer. Just a second. Where is it? Oh. So Amalei Rami Bar Chama Rav, right? 3 lines down from the top. Right, we excluded Sarah based on Olem. Ema Erva Gufe. Maybe we need the mute of Oleha for Erva herself. Forget about Sarah's Erva. To teach me that the Torah prohibits the Sarah. No, I'm sorry. He's talking about Erva Gufe. Forget about Sarah. So we're talking about Achos Ishto. And the Torah says Oleha, meaning that Achos Ishto is excluded from Yibum. But Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah Tishrei. So Rava says, what do you mean? Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah Tishrei. Kavachomer. B'Makom Mitzvah Asir. If the Torah says he can't be Mekayim the Mitzvah of Yibum with Achos Ishto, Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah Sharyeh? Could it be possible that the Torah would be mati to marry Achos Ishto if there's no mitzvah? If the mitzvah itself cannot override Achos Ishto, certainly Shalom B'Makom Mitzvah, there's no head there. Amalei, so Rabbi Bar Chama says, forget about that Kal V'chomer. That Kal V'chomer is not valid. And I'm going to prove to you that there's more reason to prohibit an erva b'makom mitzvah than shalom b'makom mitzvah. How so? Sarah Tofia. The b'makom mitzvah sira, shalom b'makom mitzvah sharia. So we have a precedent for an erva that is prohibited dafka b'makom mitzvah, and that's called a tzaras erva. That same woman, shalom b'makom mitzvah, would be mutter. Right? So let's say, for example, let's say so-and-so married Rachel. We'll call him Reuven. Reuven's married to Rachel. And Shimon married Leah. And now Reuven marries Rivka. So he has Rivka and Rachel. So after he dies or divorces, then Shimon could marry Rivka. In the fact that she is what? A tzara to his achos ishta doesn't in any way generate an isa. So you see that shalom b'makom mitzvah, we have a heter, and dafka b'makom mitzvah it's also right. Tzaras erev is only asur b'makom mitzvah. Now this is a problem. Why? Because the only reason why b'makom mitzvah achos ishto is asura is because of Eishes Ach. He says, whereas Bar Eliel Shitas Rashi Varishonim she'ein ha'ervo seres es tzarosa klal. The Torah is just saying that there's no yibum in the case of tzaras erva, and just like you don't do yibum to the erva, you can't be mekayim the mitzvah of yibum with the tzara of an erva. So there's a p'tur of yibum. Now, once she's p'tur of yibum, she goes back into the parsha of Eishes Ach. Kechol Eishes Ach shelo b'makom mitzvah. So what are you telling me? You're telling me that this is going to be a precedent that we're more machmir b'makom mitzvah. That's not so. It's not that we're more machmir b'makom mitzvah. It's that b'makom mitzvah is an Eishes Ach. We're talking about two brothers. Shalom b'makom mitzvah, it's Reuven and Shimon not related to each other in any way. So you're going to take achos isha, and you're going to tell me, wait a minute, shalom b'makom mitzvah with more mekil, and b'makom mitzvah, that's Rami Bar Chama, right? B'makom mitzvah with more machmir. No, b'makom mitzvah with machmir, because once we exclude her from yibum, she falls back into the original category of Eishes Ach. Tamua, he says, Hochachas Rami Bar Chama mitzorah. Shari Ravaton lo shalo yitaken lahachmir bi erev b'makom mitzvah yosem mishalo b'makom mitzvah v'imkein mai shivlo mitzvah lo af mitzvah lo ischadish din erev b'makom mitzvah. It's not that because of the mitzvah we're going to add a new category of an erva called tzaras erva. No, but she's p'tur min hayibum, and therefore there's no matir on the Isser Eishes Ach. That doesn't contradict Rava. Rava is still correct. We don't have any precedent to be more what? To be more machmir, to be more. Just one second. More. I get that logic again. Sorry, I apologize. I lost the mathematics. I had it, but I lost it. Again, Rava Rava was saying that what? That it's not possible to be more machmir in an erva. B'makom mitzvah, then shalom b'makom mitzvah. Again, let's go over it again. Rava is going to derive from Aleha Saras Ereb. Rami Bar Chama is going to say, no. What the Torah wants to tell you is that Shalom b'makom mitzvah, achos ishto is an Ereb. So Rava counter argues, and he says, well, how could the Torah be more machmir with achos ishto b'makom mitzvah than Shalom b'makom mitzvah? There's no havamina that achos ishto is muteres, meaning there's no erva, iser erva, in the case of shalom v'makom mitzvah, because makom mitzvah, the Torah says achos ishto is excluded. So what is Rabbi Bar Chama saying? Well, what about the case of tzaras erva? Yeah, but tzaras erva is not a steer to Rava, because tzaras erva is telling us that since she's p'tura from Yibum, therefore she falls under the erva of Eishes Ach. That has no bearing on shalom v'makom mitzvah, where there's no Isser Veishas Ah. We're not talking about Achim at all. Possibly Yashe. How are we doing on the clock, by the way? Totally oblivious to the clock. Possibly Yashe. Shalashi Tosam, Yesh Farish, Afram, Bar Chamalos, Kavin Lomashikol, Isser, Achos, and Emerald Makom Yibu. Wow, they're reinterpreting Rabbi Bar Chama. It was never Havamina that Achos Isha is Muteres. Elahiksha Shemalo Nesra Achos Isha. Wow. The whole dinner Erev Shabbat back Liftar Be Yibu. Masechet Asura Be Isra Parei. Eno Elo Bishum Shechos Ba Isra Eishes. But that since there's no mitzvah yibum, therefore she becomes Eishes. What now is Rami Bar Chama's kasha? That there is no such thing as an erev of achos isha, and that's what I'm going to derive from Olel. So Rava, your logic, Rava, was that if the makom yibum is an isa, then certainly shalom makom yibum. No. With makom yibum, it's not that the Torah created an erva of achos isha, but rather she's asura lo midinei shesat, because the Torah exempted her from yibum. How could this is Rami Bar Chama's kasha? How could you Rava? assume that Oleh is coming for Tsaras Erva. Let's use Oleh for Erva Atzma. Let's use Oleh for Erva Atzma, Erva Gufa. And what the Torah is telling you with the word Oleh is that in the case of Yibum, she's Asura not because of Achos Ishto, but rather because of Eishes Ach. But in general, there is no erva of Achos Ishto. And therefore, Rabbi, you're in trouble because you don't have the luxury of using a leah for tzaras erva. I need a leah to be matir achos ishta. And look at his language. He says, Mashi asur be'isur karev. I'm sorry, even before that. Shemolo nesra achos isha klal. You see those words? Wow. Yaakov Avinu held like that Hava. So he married two sisters. Eisha lo rava shekal v'chomer im yesh lachos isha din erva inyan p'tur yibum. What do you mean din erva? What kind of erva? I don't get it. What does it mean din erva? Yesh lo din erva inyan isa kares v'le em l'chal isur b'makom mishmor makom lo ram bar means. Ain't that Kalafon Shem, a bit sorry, she's in Erbil, you to even alone part. What's his Vahation Rava? She Kalachomer in Yesh Lachos Isha in Erbil, Indian Ptur Yibum. What does he mean by Din Erbil? What Erbil? He's talking about Achos Isha, he's talking about Eishes Ach, I don't know. Din Erbil, Indian Isa Kar. And I don't follow. Did you cop that? I mean, he did such a good job here with Rabbi Chum. I don't understand how to defend Rava. I don't know. Okay, Belinator, I'll try to, and if you could also give it some thought. The answer of Rava is so anticlimactic. I don't know. He seems to like retract every premise that he had here in Rabbi Bar Chum. I don't know. I don't know how he does that. Okay, so let's see. So in the Gemara itself, we got up to the bottom of Tesam and Aleph, Kimat, and we can start a new sugya here tomorrow. Mitzvah Amalei Levi Leret. Let's make a note of that. It's about 10 lines up from the bottom. And here in the Yalkut Avi Urim, so we have to come back to the Heshiv Lo Rav. That's really what we're going to try to do. Okay, then, gentlemen. So let me wish you a great day.